On the afternoon of January 27, 1945, a B-29 Superfortress crossed back over the coast of Japan with half of its tail gone. Not damaged, gone. The entire left horizontal stabilizer had been torn away by a Japanese fighter that flew directly into it. Nearly every control cable running back through the fuselage had been cut. The tail gunner was pinned inside a shredded compartment with a hole in the side big enough for a man to fall through. Saipan was 1,500 miles away, across open ocean, in the dark. Every rule of aerodynamics said that bomber was already finished, but it came home. Now, to understand how an airplane survives something like that, you have to understand what the Superfortress actually was. And the honest answer is that it was the largest gamble in American aviation history. The B-29 cost more to develop than the atomic bomb. Boeing built an aircraft with a 141-foot wingspan, 4 enormous engines, and a pressurized crew cabin at a time when almost nothing else in the sky was pressurized. Fully loaded, it weighed about 70 tons. And the entire design rested on a single idea: fly so high that nothing can reach you. To make the guns work at that altitude, Boeing did something nobody had done in a combat aircraft. They put the guns outside and the men inside. 5 sighting stations, remote-controlled turrets, and an analog computer that corrected for range, lead, air temperature, and bullet drop. A gunner sat in a heated, pressurized compartment, put a reticle on a fighter, and let the machine do the trigonometry. Think of it as the great-grandfather of every modern fire control system. That aircraft also made the war against Japan geographically possible. From Isley Field on Saipan, Tokyo was about 1,500 miles north. A mission meant a 3,000-mile round trip and roughly 15 hours in the air, most of it over water, with nowhere to land. By January of 1945, though, the bet was falling apart. The jet stream over Japan ran at speeds nobody had planned for, which made accurate bombing from high altitude nearly impossible. Cloud cover hid the targets. Engines overheated and caught fire. And there were no escort fighters, because nothing in the American inventory could fly 1,500 miles to Tokyo and back. The Superfortresses went in alone. The Japanese, meanwhile, had done some cold arithmetic of their own. A fighter making a firing pass at a B-29 had a few seconds and a handful of rifle-caliber machine guns. The bomber was huge, structurally tough, and at that altitude often faster than the interceptor trying to catch it. Hitting it hard enough to bring it down was genuinely difficult. So several fighter groups formed dedicated ramming flights called Shinten Sekutai, roughly translated as air superiority units. Their aircraft were stripped of armor, and sometimes of guns, just to claw up to bomber altitude. The logic was blunt but rational. A machine gun bullet weighs less than an ounce. A fighter weighs 5,000 pounds. If your bullets cannot reliably kill a Superfortress, the airplane itself becomes the weapon. To be fair, this was not always intended as suicide. Pilots were expected to strike the bomber and then take to their parachutes, and some of them did exactly that, more than once. Most did not survive. Mission number 24 was codenamed Enkindle 3. The target was the Nakajima engine plant at Musashino, on the western edge of Tokyo. 74 B-29s took off from Saipan. 12 turned back early with mechanical trouble. Curtis LeMay had commanded the 21st Bomber Command for exactly 1 week. He had not yet changed anything. This was still the old doctrine: high altitude, daylight, precision, unescorted. Over Japan, the crews found complete undercast. Not one aircraft bombed the primary target. 56 crews dropped through solid cloud on radar, aiming at a city they could not see. The formation made landfall near Hamamatsu, and the interceptors were waiting. The official mission report counts 984 separate fighter attacks and describes the opposition with a phrase you almost never see in a staff document: fighter opposition of unparalleled intensity. By one account, more than half of those attacks fell on a single 17-plane formation from the 497th Bomb Group. One of those 17 aircraft carried the tail marking A-52. The crew called her Irish Lassie. What happened over the next 90 minutes is the reason this story survived the war at all. Subscribe before we go on, because the next part is the part almost every retelling gets wrong. And it comes down to a single steel cable. Irish Lassie was at 29,000 feet when the first fighter came. The crew identified it as a Zero, diving from above and firing. The central fire control gunner swung his turrets onto it and poured rounds into the descending aircraft. Neither pilot could get out of the way. The fighter struck the left wing just behind the number 1 engine. It carried away 8 feet of aileron and about a third of the landing flap, and it opened the fuel tank. Now, this is where the story gets quietly impressive, because the response was not heroism, it was procedure. The flight engineer, Lieutenant Robert Watson, checked his instruments and realized the number 1 engine was untouched and still running. Fuel was streaming out of the ruptured cell into the slipstream, so he transferred fuel out of that tank until the level dropped below the hole, then fed it back to the engine as needed. 400 gallons went overboard. The engine kept turning. The navigator, sitting a few feet away, did not even know they had been rammed. The bomb run continued. Back in the tail, Staff Sergeant Charles Mulligan had a second fighter closing on him, low and fast. Mulligan was 22 years old, from Henderson, Kentucky, and he was alone. He fired. The fighter kept coming. He kept firing. A bullet went through his right hand and he kept firing. He held the trigger until the enemy propeller was inches from his glass, then threw his arms across his face. The fighter went into the tail. In that same second, the bombardier released the bombs on schedule. Then the aircraft came apart. The impact tore out the entire left side of Mulligan's compartment, ripped away the left horizontal stabilizer, and severed nearly every control cable in the airplane. Irish Lassie rolled out of formation and fell 8,000 feet in a slow spiral, with Japanese fighters following her down. So why did that spiral stop? The B-29 had no hydraulic boost on its primary flight controls. When a pilot pulled back on the wheel, he was physically pulling steel cables that ran the length of the fuselage to the tail. The elevators on both sides were joined by a torque tube, and from that tube, 2 separate cable runs came forward, one to the pilot's control column and one to the co-pilot's. Think of it like a heavy garage door with 2 pull ropes. Cut one rope and the door still opens, as long as somebody is standing at the other one. The fighter cut the pilot's run. It did not cut the co-pilot's. Lieutenant Leonard Fox, in the right seat, tried his wheel out of pure desperation and discovered he still had elevator authority. He pulled. The bomber came out of the spiral. Now, losing half your horizontal stabilizer is survivable, but not because the aircraft is forgiving. It is survivable because the wing is enormous. 141 feet of span generates a great deal of natural stability, so the loss of one side of the tailplane showed up as a permanent, ugly imbalance rather than an instant departure from controlled flight. All the way home, the right wing rode several feet lower than the left. Avery took the throttles and steered with engine power. Fox held the wheel and did not let go. Avery had already ordered the crew to prepare to jump. The bomb bay doors were open. Then he learned that the radio operator had been shot through the back and the tail gunner was down, and he understood that bailing out meant leaving 2 wounded men over Japan. The doors were closed. For the next hour, roughly 20 fighters worked the crippled bomber in relays. The central fire control gunner, James McHugh, ended up fighting most of them alone, timing the attacks so predictably that he could swing his turrets 180 degrees without looking. There is one moment in the crew's account that tells you everything about who these men were. A waist gunner, stripped of his turret when the other side took control of both, shouted across the compartment for help because he had 5 fighters working his side. The answer came back that there were 8 on the other side, and he could wait. Now, about Mulligan. Here is a design decision that made complete sense on paper and became a nightmare in practice. The B-29 had 3 separate pressurized compartments: the forward cabin, the gunner's compartment behind the wing, and a small isolated capsule in the tail. Boeing could not pressurize the bomb bays because the doors open in flight, so the forward and rear compartments were connected by a 34-inch tunnel running over the top of them. The tail gunner got his own sealed bubble, and he climbed in before takeoff. The consequence is simple. At altitude, nobody could reach him. Not to check on him, not to relieve him, and not to save his life. Mulligan was unconscious on the floor of a compartment with its side torn open, at 40 degrees below zero, held inside the aircraft only because shredded metal had caught in his flying clothes. His oxygen supply had been sliced away with the rest of the structure. He had managed to press his face into his mask before he blacked out. It took the crew about an hour to get him out. They went aft, 1 man at a time, carrying walk-around oxygen bottles, cut at the wreckage until they went groggy, then staggered forward and sent the next man back. They finally worked him free, laid him down, and stripped off their own flying clothes in a freezing airplane to pile on top of him. His hands could not be saved. About 150 miles off the Japanese coast, Irish Lassie spotted 3 superfortresses above her and radioed for help. What her crew did not know was that the lead aircraft, a B-29 named St. Bernard flown by Major Robert Fitzgerald, was already shepherding 2 other cripples home. Fitzgerald's answer came back over the radio. "Got 2 others, but I suppose I can take on another." The compass and gyro instruments had been knocked out in the first collision, so Irish Lassie could not navigate for herself. Fitzgerald talked her south until weather separated them near Iwo Jima. And that detail deserves a moment. Because in January of 1945, Iwo Jima was still Japanese. It held the radar station that had given the defenders over Tokyo 2 to 3 hours of warning that morning. The crippled bomber had to fly past the island that helped arrange her own ambush. Night closed in. The aircraft could not climb and did not dare descend, so it skimmed the top of a cloud layer at 18,000 feet, drifting off heading while Avery called out small corrections. Fox never moved his hands. He landed with a sprained wrist from gripping the wheel. Saipan finally answered, cleared them straight in, and put ambulances and fire trucks on the field. Then, on final approach, the airplane sank. It dropped below the level of the runway, which sits above a cliff, and started toward the rock face. Fox hauled back and nothing happened. He put his feet up on the instrument panel and pulled with everything he had left. Something snapped. The nose came up. Irish Lassie cleared the edge, hit the runway with dead engines, and slid several hundred feet throwing sparks. The nose gear collapsed and folded up through the floor, still spinning. The number 1 engine caught fire. Then the wing caught an embankment, swung the whole aircraft around, and threw the burning engine clean off. The crew climbed out into the dark. Somebody counted heads and asked where Mulligan was. They went back inside for him. 9 B-29s were lost on the 27th of January, the heaviest single mission loss the 73rd Bomb Wing had taken up to that point. Irish Lassie is counted among them. She survived Japan and died on her own runway, and she never flew again. Lieutenant Lloyd Avery and Sergeant Charles Mulligan both received the Distinguished Service Cross. Fox and Watson received Silver Stars. Most of the rest of the crew were decorated as well. Now, a word about the numbers, because you should be skeptical of them. The wing was credited with 60 Japanese aircraft destroyed that day. Gunner claims in every air force in that war were badly inflated, and actual Japanese losses were a fraction of the figure claimed. That takes nothing at all away from what those men did with a broken airplane. Here is what the mission actually changed. 23 days later, the Marines landed on Iwo Jima, and one of the arguments for taking that island was sitting right there in the January reports. The radar station, the interceptor base, and no emergency field anywhere between Tokyo and Saipan. By the end of the war, 2,241 B-29s had put down on Iwo Jima. From the 7th of April, P-51 Mustangs flew escort from it, and LeMay, who had watched 74 aircraft fly 1,500 miles to bomb clouds, abandoned the doctrine entirely. On the 9th of March, he sent his bombers in at night, at 5,000 feet, with the gunners and most of the guns removed. The tactic that nearly killed Irish Lassie helped kill the tactic that put her there. Charles Mulligan spent the rest of the war in an army hospital in Georgia, being fitted with artificial hands. He wrote letters to his old crew. By McHugh's account, he seemed to be holding up well. He went home to Henderson, Kentucky, and lived until 1993. You might think a story like this is about a machine that refused to die. It is really about a set of engineering decisions made years earlier by people who never saw combat that happened to leave one steel cable intact on the right-hand side of the airplane. If you want more stories where the engineering is the story, subscribe. There are a great many of them, and most have never been told properly.